I'm Elizabeth Ray.
I'm Alistair Stevens.
And Tom Cruise is Frank T.J. Mackey in Magnolia.
Before we get started, a little PSA here on our episode about PTA.
Okay.
This is going to be a slightly unusual episode of The Last Star in Hollywood because Magnolia is a very unusual film.
Yes.
B, we're probably going to curse more than normal this week, partly because we're going to be quoting the people involved in this film, and partly just because when we're referencing this story, I feel like there's going to be a little more, profanity.
Interesting.
In some of our discourse here. Just, enthusiasm is what I'm talking about.
Okay, well, cool.
This is an interesting film, not least of all because this is the first film in a long while that has featured Tom Cruise in which Tom Cruise has not been first billed. Paul Thomas Anderson was so enthusiastic about this movie being a real, true ensemble piece that technically Cruise is second billed under The Kid, who we'll talk about in just a little bit.
So strange.
Do you remember off the top of your head the last film that Cruise was in that he wasn't first billed?
Ooh, not off the top of my head, no.
It was The Outsiders.
Damn,
you have to go all the way back.
That's a long way
to
back.
Francis Ford Coppola's The Outsiders.
Wow.
And even then, I think he's like third billed. He's already
Sure.
kind of making a name for himself. But right after that, it's Risky Business. And from there, it's an
Yeah,
uninterrupted
that's it.
run. And most of the rest of his career, he'll spend at the top of the billing order too, at least until we get to the double whammy that is Lions for Lambs, which is Robert Redford, Meryl Streep, Tom
Amazing.
Cruise. I've never seen it.
I've
I'm
never
really
seen
looking
it either,
forward
but
to it.
I love that pairing. Yeah, I'm into it.
And then that's followed up with Tropic Thunder, where he's very deep in the credits. That one I'm not looking forward to so much.
thought
That one
we
I have
almost,
seen.
Hadn't we wiped that from the list
Yeah.
initially?
And
it
then I
landed back
watched
again?
it, and he really is a significant part of that film. We really can't.
Okay.
He doesn't get the Young Guns exemption there,
Yeah.
where he's really a cameo. He's also, in the very near future from where we are now, going to appear in Austin Powers 2, The Spy Who Shagged Me.
But that one we're skipping.
Yeah, because it's a tiny cameo
Okay.
in which he is playing Tom Cruise playing Austin. And
Right.
it's very brief, and it's really not worth talking
Okay,
about. And
that's good.
certainly not worth talking about Austin Powers 2.
No,
Yeah.
no, thank you. Yeah.
Let's talk a little about this film because we've talked a lot recently just between the two of us about our feelings about Paul Thomas Anderson, about his place in the industry, about his flag waving for cinema as art. It's a really interesting place for him to be right now. How do you feel about PTA in general coming into this film?
Coming into this, I hadn't seen enough to have a really qualified opinion. I'd seen recently Licorice Pizza, which was like kind of fine and fun, but not necessarily for me, and Phantom Thread on Netflix.
Wow.
Which I really loved. But it's one of those movies that it's like, I loved this, but I'm not going to go recommending it to people to watch. You know what I mean? Like it was very specific and strange and slow.
Yeah.
But I still just thought it was really extraordinary and magical. And I have since then been wanting to see more of his stuff because he's so well respected in the industry. And anyone who actors like clamor to work with is interesting to me right off the bat. So I've been kind of holding out hope that I was going to enjoy Magnolia, but also trying to keep, my expectations low. And I have to say, I loved it again. It was another one that I just find really strangely poignant and moving. And I'm not going to say that, I'm going to rewatch it from time to time when I'm just like, wanting to be in my feels. Like, I don't know. But I'm very grateful to have seen it. And I can't wait to talk about it with you.
I could completely see this being a film that's in a semi-regular rotation in a kind of maybe I'm having a glass of wine, maybe I'm working on something and I'm going to have it on in the background so that I can dip in and dip out. It's the
3-hour running time that makes it so inaccessible, I think.
Absolutely.
When I saw 3 Hours 8 last night at 9 p.m. when I went to watch this, I was like, fuck, okay. I was a little bit intimidated by that. And I initially thought, well, maybe I'll split it up and I'll watch the rest of it this morning. But once you're in it, it's such an immersive experience. It's so experiential.
Yeah.
I really didn't want to dip out. Like even the times when I was just like pausing it to get a glass of wine, to go to the restroom, to chat with you, felt like intrusions. I felt like this would have been something that would have been nice to be able to sit through in a theater, although I cannot imagine sitting in a theater for 3 hours 10.
Yeah, and yet it feels so intentional and, I don't know, comprehensive inside of its own fictional schematic, right? The world that it lays out is so complete and yet folded in on itself that I think the running time doesn't stand in the way of my
Yeah.
enjoyment of the film or my engagement of the film. You're right. I mean, 3 hours and 10 minutes is a hell of a slog for any movie, but this one is, I think, surprisingly light on its feet given that runtime.
Like, I don't want to cut to ribbons. I don't think there's a whole lot of fat to trim. Like, it's supposed to feel the way that it does. It's supposed to be kind of languorous, and I like that about it. It's just a lot to commit to.
Oh, perhaps ironically, Paul Thomas Anderson does think that it could be cut. By
really?
2018, he said at the time of its release, very confident for such a young filmmaker, but he said at the time of his release, quote, "I really feel that Magnolia is, for better or worse, the best movie I'll ever make." And then by 2018, when he was asked what advice he would give to himself when he was shooting Magnolia, he said this, quote, "Chill the fuck out and cut 20 minutes.
Wow. Chill the fuck out and cut 20 minutes. What would you cut?
That's a very loaded question
Oh,
and
is
a
it?
very
It's
big
so simple for
conversation.
me.
Is it
Yeah.
really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, what would you cut?
The kid does not work for me. The rapping kid is like weird. It's
Oh my God.
stereotypes that I don't
No,
like.
the rapping kid is so important. Are you kidding? The rapping kid is absolutely pivotal to this film
Tell me why.
because he foreshadows the entire plot of the film. Because what he is delivering is like this cryptic little prophecy about everything that is going to unfold in the rest of the
Yeah.
film. That kid is extremely important and may in fact be actually magical.
Okay. Okay. All right.
That's the problem with this film, right? It is so deep, but also presents its artifice so powerfully and so convincingly. You're never allowed to sink into it. You're never allowed to be
Yeah.
comfortable in the fiction because you're constantly being reminded that this is a movie and that this is impossible. And, these things don't really happen. These coincidences don't really line up like that in real life. But then it keeps drawing you in. There's a real... I want to find a better word than depth, and I'm sure I'll find one over the course of the next 2 hours that we spent discussing this film, but there is a real depth there.
Huh.
I would probably cut a lot of the Cruise stuff, honestly.
Oh,
I don't think
I would just rewrite all of the things that the Cruise performance really is so good.
it is.
But the character is terrible.
Yeah.
Like, why did you write this guy?
That's the thing, is that it's not anything to do with Cruise. I think it really is
No.
just the script. I would just cut some of that stuff.
Yeah,
But
it's true. We don't need nearly so much of his convention speech.
it's so awful
It's
too.
so awful. And it's obviously awful on purpose, and that's the whole point. It's just like trying to one-up itself with just grossness. But why? Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah. But we're already getting way too far deep into this.
As is our way.
As is our way. Before you have the,
No,
I'm
I
going to
don't-
say impossible
I don't think
task
there's anything that I need to do right now, honestly.
of giving us a movie trailer for Magnolia.
Oh, piece of cake. I've got this. American novelist and humorist Mark Twain was born in the year of the first predicted return of Halley's Comet. He died in the second predicted year of the return of Halley's Comet. Long before a certain infamous night at the theater, John Wilkes Booth's brother saved Abraham Lincoln's son from being run over by a train and killed. The sun is exactly 400 times larger than the moon and exactly 400 times further away, which is why they appear the same size and why solar eclipses are so spectacular. I mentioned these three coincidences, of course, because they're not related to one another, not hardly at all, except maybe they are. And maybe it's also a coincidence that you, that I, that we all exist on this globe all at the same time that Paul Thomas Anderson makes a film called Magnolia. It's in the movie theaters now. You're doomed to see it.
Doomed to see it is very good.
That is the doom that
The
we
doom
must
that
do.
we must do. Exactly.
So let's talk a little about Paul Thomas Anderson, PTA, born in 1970 in Los Angeles, and he has the kind of history that I think that mythologically we want all film directors to have, right?
Already, I'm thinking Born in LA is like a thing.
All of his films are
Yeah.
basically about, at least his early films, are all about the Valley because that's exactly where he grew up. That's exactly his world. And he said many times that he doesn't have the contempt that a lot of people have for it, that he has a weird kind of twisted affection for that place and that time in particular. He makes his first film at the age of 8. Then he buys
Wow.
an old Betamax video camera with his allowance when he is 12. Then a Bolex 16mm camera as a teenager. He attends Santa Monica College for a little while. Then he enrolls for 2 semesters at Emerson, where he is taught by David Foster Wallace. He then enrolls into the very prestigious film department at NYU and leaves after 2 days declaring
2 days.
declaring that college turned filmmaking into, quote, either homework or a chore, end quote.
I mean, yeah.
In an interview with The Guardian that he gave in the year 2000, he said, quote, I had a feeling that I didn't want to go there anyway. The first day I took some pages from a David Mamet script and handed them in as my own, and it got a C+. I thought they should go fuck themselves because Mamet, Pulitzer Prize winner, great playwright. He deserved a little better than a C+. End quote.
That's
I assume
so
that
weird.
is apocryphal.
I hope so.
I don't think you get an assignment to hand in pages on your first day at
Yeah.
NYU, and certainly they're not graded fast enough that you would get them back sufficiently
Yeah.
quickly that you could leave after 2 days. But the point, at least, is well made.
Mm.
Instead, he decides to go to real film school and make a 20-minute short film. He uses gambling winnings that he has earned himself. He uses his college fund, and he uses his girlfriend's credit card, which is perhaps a little less cool. The end result is Cigarettes and Coffee, an anthology film screened at the 1993 Sundance Festival Shorts program. Age 23, Paul Thomas Anderson is picked up by Reicher Entertainment and given a contract to develop his first feature film. That's how it's done.
Cigarettes and Coffee sounds kind of amazing.
Also sounds pretty cool.
Do we
right?
need to watch that?
We don't really need to because it is developed into his first full feature film. Yeah. He takes $3 million and he makes the movie called Sydney, which is later renamed Hard 8, starring Philip Baker Hall, who we just saw, John C. Reilly, who we just saw, Gwyneth Paltrow, Samuel L. Jackson. Reicher Entertainment takes the film away from him, believing that it is going to be a failure, and re-edits it. But before they can release it, he takes the work print that he has. And remember, we're back in the mid-90s here, so we're dealing with actual film in actual canisters. He takes the work print to Cannes and screens it there, and it wins the Un Certain Regard prize.
Whoa.
Anderson raises $200,000 on his own, including taking money from members of his cast to finish the movie and release it. It is a critical success. It is a huge commercial failure, but it gets exactly the right kind of attention.
Wow.
This is one of the reasons that Paul Thomas Anderson is so insistent on having Final Cut. As soon as you get a film taken away from you, to compare Anderson here to Lynch as well, of course, as soon as you get a film taken away from you, that becomes a sticking point for the rest of your career. By 1995, Anderson has expanded a short film that he made in high school into his second feature script, which he shoots for $15 million from New Line. This, of course, is Boogie Nights, starring Mark Wahlberg and Julianne Moore and Burt Reynolds and a dozen of the most interesting character actors in Hollywood. It's released in 1997. It earns Reynolds and Moore Academy Award nominations, and PTA himself gets a nomination for Best Original Screenplay, and he has arrived. That's it. 2 real feature films in, and he's done it. He's there. Have you seen Boogie Nights?
I have not seen Boogie Nights, but it's blowing my mind that somebody wrote it in high school, or at least started to.
No, he adapts the
Yikes.
story of John Holmes, right, the famous actual real-life porn star, into the story of Dirk Diggler for his first fictional short as a high school senior, and then returns to that
Wild.
story to expand it into Boogie Nights. Yeah,
Okay.
because, of course, he comes from the Valley, and porn comes from the Valley.
Yeah.
And that connection, that culture is absolutely a part of his life growing up.
Fascinating.
That being the case, we absolutely have to put Boogie Nights on the Patreon poll for the
100%.
bonus episode
That's
for
the
this
one.
month,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we should definitely...
Well, I will certainly watch it either way, regardless of what gets chosen. I am not sure how everyone's going to respond to Magnolia, and no matter what your feelings are, I'm here to say that they are valid.
And as we know, too, we cannot predict what our patrons will choose when we post a poll.
No, we cannot. I love
As
that.
of this recording, we thought that we had posted the most challenging and contentious poll of all time because we asked you guys, our dear beloved patrons, to choose between GoldenEye and Mulholland Drive and Bridget Jones's Diary. And as of this recording, it is 100% Bridget Jones's Diary. An absolute
wild.
clean sweep. Which I love because I love Bridget Jones's Diary. Thrilled with the critical and commercial success of Boogie Nights, New Line tells Anderson that he can do whatever he wants for his next film. Michael DeLuca, the head of production at New Line at the time, literally signs a contract giving Anderson final cut of the movie, whatever that movie is, without even hearing a pitch.
Wow.
Anderson initially envisions a small, intimate story, but as he writes the script, it grows and grows and grows and eventually turns into Magnolia.
Which is still, I think, small and intimate.
I mean, in a sense, yes. I think that the, cast of a dozen main characters and the 3-hour running time kind of belie any interpretation of intimacy and smallness. But I think you're right, in its emotional tone, while it is incredibly operatic,
Yes.
it is
nice word.
pursuing that operatic tone in support of, real life character moments, I think. And the intimacy certainly perhaps is still there, if only emotionally.
Yes.
He's inspired, of course, by the music of Amy Mann, with whom he is already friends. He listens to her first 2 albums and demos of her 3rd album repeatedly while writing, and some of the dialogue comes directly from her lyrics. After the script is complete, he sends her a copy asking her to write some original music for the score, and she winds up writing 2 songs, You Do and Save Me, which closes the movie, and was nominated for Best Original Song at the 2000 Academy Awards. We'll return to the Academy Awards in just a moment.
Oh, this explains the weird haircut that we saw Tom Cruise in the last time we watched that Academy Awards, by the way. I was
exactly
like,
right.
Why is his hair so long? I've never seen it long
this
and
is
weird
the
like
Eyes
that.
Wide Shut year. Why is he? Why does he
and
look like
that's
that?
why.
Yeah.
And then when I saw it, I was like, oh, there it is. It's a bad look.
Wise Up, the Amy Mann song that the characters sing in the film, was originally written, weirdly, for Jerry Maguire. And if you look at the lyrics to that song, they fit here beautifully, of course. But they would also have worked pretty well in Jerry Maguire.
Wild. So cool.
You grew up in the United States in the 1990s, so you have opinions about Amy Mann. Please tell them to me now.
Well, as I said last night, I had conflated Amy Mann with Anna Nalick for a bit. So my apologies to both women.
I had kind of conflated Amy Mann with Amy Grant.
Now that's unforgivable. That's super weird.
It's not really, because honestly, neither woman had much of a career in Britain at all. So I've become familiar with Amy Mann only really after coming to the United States, 15 years ago or however long.
Well, I certainly loved all of the music from this film. So I like Amy Mann and I like Anna Nalick. And
that's an incidental detail that has no proceedings here. But I like both of those women too. I went and listened to the first Amy Mann album actually while I was prepping my notes for this podcast. It's just really good.
I'll bet it is.
It's very consistent, but there's a really sophisticated lyricism. I think maybe the lyricism kind of exceeds the production a little bit, and you've got to factor in 30 years of the music industry advancing, quote unquote advancing, but lyrically I think that she's very deft, very sophisticated, very honest, and I really enjoy her voice just at a very superficial level.
Absolutely.
I think she's got a real good voice.
Love that. In general, I think all of the music in Magnolia was really great. I think that I don't even know what all of it was, but there were so many things that were so unexpected. Carmen, I think of the opera, that they just dropped the opera in there. And of course, the Amy Mann. I knew about the needle drop, but I didn't know about everybody singing along. So that was a lovely, delightful surprise for me. And I think it really worked, even though it was such a strange swing.
Yeah. It is a really interesting choice in that it brackets the end of the second act really beautifully. I prefer the mechanism that we use to end the first act. I think that is just as powerful. That's when we get the voiceover introducing the game show, and we literally whip pan from character to character to character, which I think works really well. I was spoiled on the existence of the song at the end of the second act, and I was spoiled on the performative aspect of it, because while reading about this film, so many people were talking about Julianne Moore and talking about how incredible she was. And Paul Thomas Anderson says that he went to her first because he was worried that he would have a hard time selling it to the cast. So he goes to her first, knowing that if he can convince her to knock it out of the park, that everyone else, actors being competitive, as he says, everyone else would rise to the challenge. And that means that I went in with some certain expectations about how Julianne Moore was going to perform.
Let down.
It's good. It's just so low key. And I think
she's shot outside of a car on a rainy day. She's basically passed out, almost dead. So,
I think almost everyone else acquits themselves with more force and power than she does in that moment. And, well, we'll talk about the Julianne Moore of it all in due course. We mentioned in the last episode of The Last Star in Hollywood how PTA visited the set of Eyes Wide Shut during production and was shamed by Kubrick over the size of his crew. He sends Cruise a copy of this script after he's just finished shooting Eyes Wide Shut. And though Cruise is initially excited to work with Anderson, he's a little unsure about the role of Frank T.J. Mackey for obvious reasons. But Anderson and New Line head Michael DeLuca persuade him. They just convince him that this is going to be a good move. Frank is based, of course, on the work, and I use the term work loosely, of the director, producer, and author, I guess I'm using that term loosely too, Eric Weber, who in 1968 wrote the book How to Pick Up Girls and started this squalid little revolution. I
had never heard of that. Gross.
Yeah, well, most of his work has been superseded by the work of Ross Jeffries, who continues Weber's work in the late 80s into the 1990s, bringing in some of that really dubious application of neurolinguistic programming and modern understandings of psychology. Those guys suck. Pickup artists suck. The game sucks. All these guys are the worst.
Yeah, which the movie clearly knows.
Clearly, yeah. But although the movie, I think, is articulating it in some really interesting and unexpected ways, as vile as it is, it's doing some things with purpose about, self-loathing and about the damage done by mothers in particular, the damage done by fathers in particular. There's also, all through the beginning of his presentation, I think, a really weird closeted homoerotic
Definitely.
subtext.
100%.
Which is so strange and so seemingly, obviously intentional, but seemingly unintentional. And I don't quite know what to make of that. And that's going to be an ongoing thread, I think, as we discuss this film, is that really it's kind of hard to pin down. It's kind of hard to distill. But that's part of its magic.
I'm completely fine with that.
Yeah.
The whole thing reminds me of I don't know, like some spoken word poem, word association game, I don't know what, but I find it really lovely.
I do think the connection with spoken word poetry in particular is extremely astute and very applicable to this film. Yeah. During production, of course, Anderson and Cruise shoot the entire infomercial promoting the seduce and destroy technique. And then Anderson actually pays for it to go out on TV late at night in New York.
Weird.
And there are all these stories about people. Did I really see Tom Cruise hawking some pickup artist bullshit on TV last night? It's pretty funny.
Some viral marketing. I like that.
Yeah, you can find the unexpurgated cut on YouTube. I'll link to it in the show notes. You don't need to watch it. It's like a minute and a half. You really don't need to see it. But it is, God, it's gross.
Gross.
That, I guess, takes us to perhaps the biggest thing about this film in terms of our understanding of both this movie and of Tom Cruise's career. He's kind of fantastic in this film. Do you
I think so.
buy it as a good, legitimate actor performance?
Yes, definitely I do. Yeah, he's doing some really lovely things, particularly I think when he's in the interview seat.
Yeah.
I think that he's doing so much with no dialogue. It's just on his face, just shutting down. I thought that was lovely.
That, for me, was the moment that my understanding crystallized that, yes, what he's actually giving is a really sophisticated performance rather than just leaning into his most
camp, almost.
Most cokey excesses.
Yes.
Almost. There's a lot of that. The little backflip that he does.
Loved it, though. Loved
so
it.
good. But that is that is peak Outsiders energy.
Oh, yeah.
Right
100%. Yes,
as
exactly.
a kid showing up with everything to prove and nothing to lose. It's wild. Much of the cast of this film had, of course, already worked with Anderson on Boogie Nights, and this is a hell of a list, right? Julianne Moore, John C. Reilly, William H. Macy, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Louise Guzman, Philip Baker Hall, of course, Alfred Molina, Ricky Jay, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Robert Downey, and I'm probably missing 10 other people. The list of shared collaborators between Boogie Nights and this film is huge, and PTA will continue to develop that as he moves through his career. He just has this repertory company. Philip Seymour Hoffman does 5 out of Paul Thomas Anderson's first 6 films.
That's amazing.
And probably would have done more if not for the tragic circumstances of his death.
Yes.
I adore Philip Seymour Hoffman.
He's so wonderful in this too. Just so lovely.
Is this his peak performance? Is he ever better
that I've
than
seen?
This?
I mean, this is my favorite that I've seen of him, I think. Yeah, it puts him to the best use, I would say.
It's going to be tempting to run through the cast list and just ask, is this
their best? Is this their best? Yeah.
There are so many actors that I adore. Alfred Molina showing up for a one-scene turn in which he's just magnificent. I mean, it's maybe a little chocolat, which is not my favorite mode for Alfred Molina to be in, but it's so good. William H. Macy has never been better.
Extraordinary performance.
I think it's fantastic what he does in a relatively, well, that's the thing. All of these spotlights, I guess, are relatively brief. If you cut them all out and line them up end to end, they wouldn't last that long, but it's really impressive.
John C. Reilly giving me something that's really believable and lovely for the first time that I maybe have ever seen.
Once again, I was kind of, poisoned by knowledge going into this because I thought a lot of the story about this is, well, we wanted to give John C. Reilly something that he'd never done. So I was expecting it to be more different, but it's pretty John C. Reilly.
Yeah, I mean,
really.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I maybe went
It's just not as, again, not as campy, I suppose. Not as
not
comedic
as outright comedic, for sure. Yeah. But still bumbling is still a thing that I associate with him. I do think it's a lovely performance, though. And I think that he manages with incredible humility to just hold the camera as the worst person on earth for minutes at a time. It's absolutely wild what he manages to do. Principal photography for this film begins on January the 12th, 1999. The schedule originally calls for 79 days, which is pretty long, but not, unmanageable. They end up shooting 90 days plus 10 days of second unit material, which is still, so brief compared to Cruise's experience with Kubrick on Eyes Wide Shut. Paul Thomas Anderson doesn't like New Line's approach to marketing the film, So he does it himself. He literally designs his own poster. He literally cuts his own trailer, and he writes the liner notes for the soundtrack album, which is going to be released. He refuses to allow the movie to be sold on Tom Cruise's name in particular, but he also refuses to allow any of the parts to be elevated above the others. This is a true ensemble piece. Magnolia gets a limited release in 7 theaters on December 17th, 1999, then goes wide on January 7th, 2000. From its budget of $37 million, it makes $48.5 million worldwide, which for a film like this is a riotous success. And as I said, it was nominated for 3 Academy Awards. Cruise is nominated for Supporting Actor, his 3rd and final acting nomination thus far, though he will also get a production nomination for Top Gun Maverick. Anderson was nominated for Best Original Screenplay, and Save Me by Amy Mann was nominated for Best Original Song. Obviously, none of them won. Let's run down the list, shall we? The other nominees, well, 99 is a pretty good acting year, as it turns out. The other nominees alongside Tom Cruise were Haley Joel Osment for The Sixth Sense, Jude Law for The Talented Mr. Ripley, Michael Clarke Duncan for John Coffey in The Green Mile, and the winner is probably the weakest of that bunch because it's Michael Caine in The Cider House Rules.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
A good choice? A bad choice? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I saw Cider House Rules, but a million years ago, so I couldn't really say. That is kind of surprising. That's a weird bunch. That's a strange group of people. Yeah.
The screenplay category is similarly odd. Topsy Turvy by Mike Leigh, The Sixth Sense by M. Night Shyamalan, Magnolia by Paul Thomas Anderson, Being John Malkovich by Charlie Kaufman,
wild,
and American Beauty by Alan Ball, which is the 1999ist script of all. That's so wild.
That's wild that American Beauty and Magnolia came out the same year.
I think that these are like sister films. I think that Magnolia has stood the test of time far better than American Beauty. And I think that it has a genuine insight and depth and subtlety and ambition that American Beauty pretended to have. And then 6 months later, everyone was walking around, emerging from a daze, wondering what the hell had just happened. I should honestly, in all fairness, revisit that film because I haven't seen it maybe since it came out. But yeah, I think that Magnolia, there's no doubt in my mind that Magnolia is a much better film.
Yeah.
The Best Original Song category, of course, When She Loved Me, Randy Newman from Toy Story 2.
Sure.
A magnificent song. By far the best thing that Randy Newman's ever written, right?
That was Sarah McLachlan, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It's an incredible piece of work at the heart of that film. Blame Canada by Trey Parker and Mark Shyman from South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, if you remember that one. Music of My Heart by Diane Warren, one of Diane Warren's innumerable nominations for which he has never yet received an award, from the movie Music of the Heart. Save Me by Amy Mann from Magnolia. And You'll Be in My Heart from Tarzan by Phil fucking Collins.
That's a great fucking song.
It's a terrible song by a terrible man.
You're just wrong about this. I listened to the Tarzan soundtrack on vinyl when I was in LA. I'm serious. That's a thing that happened.
On purpose?
Well, I didn't actually put it on myself, but Michelle put it on, and I was like, oh yeah, Phil Collins, let's go. And then we had the conversation about how you don't like Phil Collins, and she responded the way everyone does. Alistair? What? He's so amazing. I guess there's not such a thing as a perfect man because he doesn't like Phil Collins. Who hurt him?
It's my Persian flaw. I'm cursed with insight. It's my Cassandran ability to tell people that Phil Collins has been bad this whole time. That is kind of all the background material that we have, and we should probably acknowledge right now that we are not going to do a conventional beat by beat. We're not going to move through the plot of this film for obvious
That would be insane.
reasons.
I don't even know how that would go.
I genuinely think it would take longer than watching the film.
I think it would.
There's no question, right? Instead, I guess we're going to move character by character, theme by theme. We can just kind of pick and choose. This is going to be perhaps more conversational than this part of the podcast usually is, and I'm looking forward to it, I have to say. We should start probably with this challenging, abrasive prologue, right? This odd little black and white film shot on an actual Pathé newsreel camera. You've got to love that technical capability from PTA, particularly for someone who didn't go to formal film school. I think he has such an unbelievable, like almost a peerless mastery of his frame. It's absolutely outrageous.
The cinematography was just, it knocked my socks off all the way through.
And to do that without developing a reputation like Kubrick, like Fincher,
Yeah.
like Nancy Meyers for taking forever to make a film, right? He turned this around in 90 days. That's
insane.
for a 3-hour film. Right? He did 2 back-to-back movie shoots contained within the same movie shoot, and he did it in 90 days. And it looks like this. It has this unbelievable intentionality. It's genuinely staggering. Like he is absolutely a top-tier technical filmmaker, whether you like his narrative sense, his narrative impulse, or not. I think you cannot take anything away from him technically.
I agree. Yeah, the whole film was beautiful. I loved the colors too. The lighting was really gorgeous. The movement of the camera was really
Unbelievable.
just unbelievable.
I mean,
yeah.
we'll talk
and
about
then
it.
its stillness.
We'll talk about it a little when we get there, but that tracking shot, like the big tracking shot, is so
good.
unbelievably masterful. That is as good as anything that Robert Altman did, honestly. It's an absolutely phenomenal piece of cinematography. And to do that in motion too, and to deliver so much narrative while you're doing it is just stunning. Just stunning. So the opening prologue, we get this narration from Ricky Jay. Did you recognize that?
No,
that was Ricky Jay
I was
doing
going
the
to say,
narration?
first of all, who is Ricky Jay? And second of all, who is the narrator?
Ricky Jay is best known, I think, as a stage magician. I think he may have invented the thing of throwing a playing card across the room and like sticking it into a watermelon. Like he was a very skilled card thrower, but also a very skilled stage magician in general. Kind of a general raconteur, entertainer of the old school vaudevillian variety as well. Kind of did some stand-up comedy and that kind of thing. Also a writer, also an actor. He appears here as the, executive producer of the game show, the guy with the beard. On the set of the game show, yes.
The guy who's not Felicity Huffman and not Clark Gregg.
Is that Clark Gregg?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Definitely. The guy who's like, and we're on in 3, 2, 1.
That
Point
is
to the camera. That's definitely Clark Gregg.
Outrageous. That is, you're absolutely right. That's Clark Gregg. Wow.
I love him.
I love Clark Gregg.
I know. Always happy to see him.
Didn't care for his movie.
Did he get a movie?
No. Do you remember that film that he wrote and directed, Trust Me?
Oh, yeah.
About
that was
the
not
Hollywood
so great.
agent.
I
that
do
takes,
remember.
It's kind of fine for most of its running time and then takes the world's worst turn at the end.
Weird, dark turn at the end. Yeah. No, you're right. I'd forgotten about that.
So that's Ricky Jay. And as to who the narrator is within the frame of the fiction, I have no idea. I mean, we can start to speculate.
I just thought that was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's all part of the artifice, right? It's all part of this film's constant Brechtian alienation, right? It's constant desire to remind you that you are watching a film, that this is a thing of artifice, that this is a created, constructed thing that is happening in front of you, and that none of it has really happened, even while we are insisting that it has really happened, right? We get the weird beat from Philip Seymour Hoffman when he's on the phone, when he's
this is the part of the movie where you held me.
Yeah. And I think that scenes like that happen in movies because scenes like that happen in real life, right?
So
like
weird.
Enfolding the alienation in on itself. It's such a bold move. And ultimately, of course, I think we're left with the inescapable conclusion that Anderson does not want us to ever sink into this narrative in a naturalistic mode. We don't ever want to be absorbed
so much
by
if you did. Yeah.
I think it would, right? Because if nothing else, all of the editing rhythms are off. All of our focus is off. The emotional tonality is off. I think we have to view it more like it is happening on a stage, more like it is operatic, right? And in that way, of course, he's a lot like Wes Anderson. No relation between those two men, despite the fact that they are, extremely artful filmmakers of the modern era. I think Anderson also likes to create these little dioramas, likes to create these little boxed sets that we can explore through the imaginative use of a camera. Much less naturalistic than Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yeah.
So we get the 6-minute opening prologue. We get The Murder of the Chemist in Greenberry Hill by men named Greenberry and Hill. We get The Wild Dropping of Patton Oswalt on a Tree Near a Forest Fire.
So strange.
Such a great little appearance from Patton Oswalt, though. I always love to see him. Then we get the suicide of the pilot who had previously attacked Patton Oswalt in the casino. We get the legal conundrum of the attempted suicide that turns into a real homicide. That is a thought experiment that is presented to first-year law students as a way of exploring the limits of culpability with regard to the law. So
interesting.
That's where that little story comes from. And then we wrap it all up, of course, with the narrator saying, "This cannot be a matter of chance. These strange things happen all the time." 6 minutes in. What do you think of that prologue?
I liked it. I mean, it made me curious. It was so strange. It kind of gave me an idea of what to expect from the film, which was just kind of a wild ride that nonetheless felt emotionally true, but in all other ways just absurd.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I got. So I liked it. It worked. It hooked me.
Does it establish anything meaningful about like the interaction of coincidence or of chance or of kind of reciprocal causality in the film, do you think? Or is it's just raising these issues so that we're thinking about them as we move on? Does it have a
I think
message?
just thinking about them. I don't think that there's a message there, except, I think it's mostly table setting and maybe just an invitation to speculate that somebody is pulling strings somewhere.
That's an interesting and almost inevitable read. Yes.
Right, yeah.
From there, we get the, there's no real nice way of saying this. This is my least favorite part of the film. This Amy Mann cover of One is the Loneliest Number goes on for 7 minutes.
It goes on for a very, very long time.
7 full minutes. I think it is not very good. I think the song sucks anyway.
The song isn't great.
I think the arrangement's not very good, and I would much prefer this conceptual introduction to like all of our main characters, this impressionistic introduction to our cast without that song kind of droning over it. I really like Amy Mann. I really like the soundtrack to this film. This is such a bad use of that song and that performer for me. I mean, and I get it too, right? Isolation. Understood. We're ready to move on.
Right. Yeah, it didn't throw me out, but I do remember thinking, boy, this song's been playing for a long time. So yeah. I guess that's maybe damning in its way. Yeah.
What works for you about this introduction? Who are you most immediately attached to? Is there anyone who's not working for you? Is there anything here that's particularly frictional for you or particularly compelling for you?
I mean, I really enjoyed it. Again, it's just like such a mood piece. The whole thing is. So I liked getting all of our introductions and seeing all the people that we're going to be following, not knowing how they're connected, but knowing because of the prologue that obviously they're going to be connected. Was all really interesting.
We even get to see a few of those intersections occur just as we very, very fleeting and fragile as we move through this opening sequence. The only thing that I misconstrued, which I think is intentional, is reading Julianne Moore as the daughter of the dying man and not the wife of the dying man.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think that is intentional because it's handled as such a reveal when we get to the lawyer's office later in the piece. I think that we're not necessarily supposed to anticipate that move.
I totally read that.
You did?
Yeah,
interesting.
But I don't know why. So that's very interesting.
You're just more emotionally sophisticated than
I don't know.
We're cinematically acute.
Well, and she was giving something closer to guilt than grief.
Do you want to start with, that's an insane place to start, but they're all kind of equally insane places to start. Do you want to start with Linda as a storyline, or would you rather do, I think, as the film expects us to do, and maybe start with Jim? Start with John C. Reilly?
Yeah, I'm happy either way. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's start with John C. Reilly because that's kind of where we're anchored as we begin the piece. So we can gloss his entire storyline, right? He gets caught up initially in this disturbance that turns into a murder investigation from which he is immediately sidelined.
Right.
His real purpose is to get involved with Claudia romantically, pseudo-romantically at first, and then outright romantically. And then, of course, to save William H. Macy right there at the end of the movie. What do we think of this? We talked a little about the quality of the performance. We like John C. Reilly in this mode?
I think so. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, he's doing something really lovely because, of course, he is bumbling like you talked before. But he's also giving something that's very human, and his awkwardness, like, I buy. I don't usually care for religious inflected characters, but he works for me.
I love the specificity with which that religious quality is invoked. I don't necessarily go for his praying in the car. That didn't totally work for me the 2 times that we do that. But we see him in the light of the cross on his bedroom wall twice. The first time he is turned toward it, praying. The second time he is turned away from it, shrouded in darkness. And it's like, okay, PTA, we get it. But please keep doing it. Like, please continue to be this heavy-handed with it.
I liked the prayer
really
in the car,
effective.
too. I liked it. I really liked his... There was something he said about meeting Claudia where he was like, something about how God had put her into his life, but it was up to him what he did next. And he was like, I won't let you down, or, I'm not going to mess this up, or and it's lovely. I don't know.
I'm inclined to like that a little more without the kind of echo of that scene, like the reflection of that scene that we get when he's scrambling around in the undergrowth trying to find his lost gun. Where he's giving like a very similar kind of, it's just a prayer of desperation, right? It's the kind of prayer that self-involved people offer. It's not actually about faith. It's not actually about like a larger understanding of the world. It's like you can be grateful when you think that you've just been handed everything that you want, and you can be desperate when you think that it's been taken away from you, but it's not really anchored in any kind of deeper faith. Does that
I think that's
true to
fair.
you? Does that ring true to you?
No, that does ring true to me.
But even in that, I think that like quiet, mundane desperation is a rich part of his character.
Also, I think that his prayer speaks to, or his prayers speak to his loneliness, and that he just doesn't have anybody else to talk to.
That's certainly true, yeah. And I mean, that's where we start with all of these characters, right? All these characters are in isolation, either literally or metaphorically. And we arc toward, well, not just a greater connection for these characters, but a greater interconnectivity of everything everywhere all at once.
As it were.
Right? I think that's really strong. I found the performance that John C. Reilly gives to be so challenging in that opening sequence when he's investigating the disturbance, when he comes through the door, as he's just repeatedly resorting to these same emotional notes and even same lines of dialogue when he's in opposition and in conflict with this woman. That's so hard. And it felt to me at the very beginning of this film, right? That's the first real dialogue scene that we get. And it felt so much like Lynch light. It felt so much like someone was aiming for Lynchian weirdness and just not, because that's not a scene that you could get in Twin Peaks: The Return.
Yeah.
But ultimately, of course, it's turned to very different purpose. But in that moment, it wasn't really connecting for me. It wasn't really working for me. I do think he rounds out really quite beautifully. And though I find it difficult to engage with him, you know, dropping his nightstick in the hallway of the apartment and what have you, I don't love that. I don't love him kind of navigating his professional responsibilities toward Claudia and kind of doing the end around so that he can ask her out, even while acknowledging that he shouldn't be doing it. That not awesome, perhaps. And his, of course, complete obliviousness of her utter desperation and constant drug use.
Yes.
Has any character in any film ever used more drugs?
I mean,
than
I was
Claudia?
pretty sure this was going to be an overdose story, and when it wasn't, I was surprised. Yeah.
It's astonishing. And in fact, to give her like whatever moral catharsis, whatever emotional catharsis we get at the end of the story, to give that to her is such an interesting play.
Yeah.
I think. What do you think about the film's most audacious structural move here, highlighting this murder plot right at the beginning, only for it to be all but completely sidelined as we move through the rest of the film? Dislike, really?
Dislike, yeah. It's too soon in the beginning, after we're given all of that prologue and then all of those character introductions.
Yeah.
And then something that feels like it's got so many red threads connecting it, to have none of those actually go anywhere was frustrating to me, because
we get two red threads connecting it, because we get the boy who will give us the prophetic rap.
Right.
Such a weird element, you're right, but I can't help but love it. And
I would love it if it just landed a little bit more than it does.
Well, much later, the character that he is chasing when he drops his gun, when his gun goes missing,
right?
That character in the raincoat that he spots and has that like immediate suspicion about, that is the worm. That is the guy that is referenced, and that is the killer. There is an extended scene that was cut from the finished movie.
But since that's, I had to look that up, so I knew that, but only because I like, what the hell is the thing with the rap and who's the worm and whatever. Yeah. And so a Reddit thread answered that for me, but the film did not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's totally fair. But I think that sidelining is intentional, right? It's in the same way as we are constantly being reminded of the artifice of the film cinematically. Here we're being reminded of the artifice of the film narratively, because we're being introduced into a pretty conventional murder mystery plot that we are not going to pursue, not going to resolve in any way whatsoever. And I think that it's the same kind of tactic, right? It's the same kind of narratological maneuver. Do those things seem connected to you, or do you think I'm fishing a little bit here?
I'm gonna turn that right back around and ask you, because I think that I said no, I don't like it. It doesn't work for me. But I'm hearing from you that you like that move.
I don't know that I like it so much as I find it interesting, as much as I find it a useful tool by which we might understand the film as a whole. You know, that it's never, so many of the narrative moves and the emotional moves that we make in this film are just not the ones that you expect. They're just not. Sure. We are so often
like sleight of hand happening,
thwarted in our expectation, right? Even the Julianne Moore relationship, Linda and Earl's relationship, right? Even if you don't make the assumption that I made, that they were father and daughter, and then that first reveal with the lawyer is actually a reveal, even if you don't make that assumption, the actual mechanics of that plot are not at all what you would expect them to be.
True.
In a somewhat noir-inflected, primetime drama kind of story, because she's just so much more complicated and conflicted than that. She's so much more fractured than that. I think the same can be said of the relationship between Stanley and his father, right? That beat right at the end where he says, you have to be nicer to me. And he says, go to bed. We're not going to hug. We're not going to learn. We're not even going to move forward. It's heartbreaking. Everything that we just said about Claudia and her incessant drug use.
Yeah.
We set up an expectation that is not going to be delivered. And that's not to say that the film doesn't deliver. It just never wants to give us exactly what we expect or what we anticipate. So I find the quote-unquote murder mystery, as much as you can even think of it as a murder mystery, to be really consistent with that approach, really consistent with that kind of, the game that PTA is playing with the audience here. I find it very consistent with that and rewarding for that.
Okay.
I read the script that features the scene with the worm, and I'm glad that it was cut. I think it is a good choice to cut it.
Okay.
But a little more connecting thread between those two seemingly disparate events would have worked, although I'm not convinced that it doesn't work. The way that he is so immediately suspicious of the guy in the raincoat.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he is oblivious to everything that is happening. It feels supernatural is what it is. It feels like it's a moment of something larger happening, which is exactly the kind of thing that would happen if this were a murder mystery, right? So we kind of return to that narratological well in a really interesting way. But yeah, so it doesn't bother me there.
Okay.
And I'm generally, I think, extremely appreciative of what PTA is doing structurally in this film. I think it's very bold. I think it's very rich. It doesn't always land completely, but still strong nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
We get the date between Jim and Claudia later, which I don't think carries a lot of narrative weight. Really, his narrative purpose is to be there with Donnie Smith, with William H. Macy at the end of the film, right? It's that moment of unity, these two people no longer alone.
Yes. But I think that getting Jim and Claudia together is maybe just as important.
Okay. I guess Jim being there for Donnie, right? This is his actual service to his community.
Right.
This is the actual moment when he is a cop. The fact that he genuinely helps, the fact that he genuinely resolves, and then exercises his wisdom, his judgment, not to make things worse for Donnie, but to actually be merciful. I think is a
which
really
makes him
strong.
Not like a cop at all.
Hey, again, another subversion of our narrative expectation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. Yeah, in terms of the larger plot, perhaps, but you're right. Finding this, conciliation, this harmony is the word I keep going toward and then stepping away from because it's not that.
It's not quite.
But a consonance, perhaps, between Jim and Claudia. I think that works pretty well.
I enjoyed their date very much.
Yeah.
She was, of course, coked out and manic, but I thought her performance was great. I really bought her nerves. I particularly loved when she said something about, let's get past like the shit and piss that break most people up right from the beginning. And he's like, oh, wow, you use strong language. And she's so apologetic. And he's like, no, go ahead. It's okay. But all of that was just really lovely, I thought. And I found myself rooting for both of them in a way that I usually don't, especially because so often you feel that some oafish idiot is being rewarded with a hot girl. And I didn't, for the most part, feel that way. Although I do think that the actress Claudia
Melora Walters, yes.
Okay, who I don't recall seeing in anything else.
She has been around in a million things. She's got a very extensive IMDb.
I'm great. Yeah. I'm really grateful to hear that. That's good. In any case, she did seem to be, if anyone, a bit exploited in this movie, which was surprising considering her character. But I think, again, that's something that PTA was doing
exploited is interesting because I think we're supposed to interpret, she says it outright, in fact, which is another great subversion of our expectation when she comes right out and said, you're not going to like me when you get to know me. You're not going to like the things that I am the minute that you find out about them, because, we would expect that secret to be held and to be kept.
Yeah.
And in essence, it's revealed immediately and then never comes up, which is an excellent kind of double subversion of that usual storyline. Are you thinking about her utility in terms of her relationship with Jim or in terms of her other storyline?
I mean the actress specifically in the beginning.
Okay.
We get her having sex with this guy and we see her body.
Yep. We also get her frosted but naked in the shower.
In the shower, yeah. And both of those to me just feel unnecessary and exploitative.
Certainly, yeah. And out of step with the way that we depict the other characters. I think maybe you can infer, if you're inclined to go on this kind of, exploratory journey, I think you can maybe infer a disassociation between her sense of herself and her sense of her body
Yes.
being represented there. But again, yeah,
And I
you can't
think,
do the thing and then pretend you're not doing the thing while you're still doing the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's something I don't love there. Yeah.
No.
The same with the black stereotypes I felt in the film, where I was just like, I feel like you're trying to point to something, but you're still doing the thing that I don't want you to be doing.
Yeah.
Like there was, I don't like that either.
Particularly the woman in the first scene, I think.
Woman in the first scene, absolutely.
So challenging.
Well, and initially Claudia too, when we first got her, and she's just a screaming, yelling mess. And I'm thinking, are all of the women just going to be emotional, having rage fits? And kind of yes,
but also so is everyone else.
But so is everyone else.
Like,
exactly.
Really
exactly.
gendered.
So that's why you can't. Yeah. And I think one of the most still and
magnetic, I think we're probably thinking about the same performance. April Grace as Guinevere, the interviewer.
Oh my God.
How good is that performance?
So good. She was so good.
Yeah.
She stole the scene from Tom Cruise like a couple of times.
Yeah. No,
really
absolutely.
Extraordinary performance.
She's phenomenal. And again, it's a subversion of expectation because she's really being very human and very occupied with the truth. And she's giving this guy chances and he cannot see it. It's, that is a knockout. Again, another.
She's incredible.
Absolutely not quite a one scene performance, but basically a one scene performance and so incredibly powerful.
Yeah. She's great.
And I guess the last thing that we have to talk about vis-a-vis Jim is the gun falling from the sky right at the end. Maybe we'll wrap that up.
Wait.
Maybe we'll talk about intercession.
Raining frogs.
Yes, right at the end of our discussion here. Since we're kind of adjacent to Claudia now, shall we shift gears and talk about the other story that she's half a part of? Shall we move from Jim to Jimmy? Shall we move from the boyfriend to the father?
I did not realize that. Jim and Jimmy.
Weird, huh?
Ew, that is weird. Odd. Okay.
Jimmy is challenging in a way that I think the other characters are not because he remains consistently inscrutable.
Yes.
I genuinely don't know at the end of the film what we are supposed to make of him. I genuinely don't know whether he is supposed to have our sympathy. And obviously, it is left absolutely ambiguous within the frame of the film whether or not he molested Claudia.
I don't think it's ambiguous at all.
Walk me through that.
Okay, well, first of all, when called out on it, when he's like, I don't know. That's the most bullshit answer that you can possibly give. Secondly, it's there on the wall in the painting, but it really happened.
But is that what it's referring to? Is that what that painting is referring to? Again, the specificity of the cinematography there is so spectacular.
Yes.
But that's also right at the point when the Reign of Frogs is beginning and we are dealing with the most outlandish event of the whole film, right? And we're calling back to...
But that happened too.
Yeah,
That's what's so beautiful when we get to that part. But yes, it happened.
I think that you're right. I feel that you're confident.
I think there's none.
I guess the ambiguity that I'm feeling is not the ambiguity of whether or not it happened, because I think you're completely right. And nothing else really justifies Claudia's emotional reaction, or we can speculate, the broader swath of her life choices here. What I'm a little confused about is, and maybe there's a little bit of the Lynch sneaking in here too. Maybe there's a little bit of the Who Killed Laura Palmer of it all, not to spoil Twin Peaks, because, hey, it's increasingly inevitable that at some point we're going to do a Twin Peaks show. But I wonder to what degree he really doesn't remember, or what that even means, or how we're supposed to parse that. I just don't know.
Yeah, nope. I just took it as...
So you read it as him lying to his wife. That
and
even
to himself.
Even after he's admitted to the adultery, which we see so graphically at the beginning of the film, even after he's admitted to the adultery, he can't admit this to her, to himself?
To both of them, yeah. To anyone, I think.
I think that's an absolutely rock-solid read. I can't dispute that one bit. Overall, though, what do we make of Jimmy Gator?
Well, I think the performance is incredible. He reminds me of Jerry Orbach. I think it's just around the eyes. He's got that same, those deep crevices underneath.
I see it.
So I thought his performance was lovely. I thought the character was very interesting and nuanced. And just the goddamn worst. Yeah. When it came down to it.
Also kind of inextricable from the context of the game show, right? This weird anachronistic game show that would have felt out of place in the 1980s.
Totally. Yeah.
Let alone 1999. No one makes a show like that and hasn't for years and years.
Yeah.
It feels so artful and intentional. Maybe the most Wes Anderson moment in the entire film, right? Is
Yeah.
the first time that you see that set and you're like, oh my God,
Yes.
this constructed little box here is so purposeful.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know how to read him. I don't know how to read him thematically, really. I don't know what his connection is with the rest. I mean, literally, of course, I understand his connection, but I don't understand what his connection is with the rest of the film, except as an avatar for, forgive me, for child abuse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Literally, he abuses his own child, and then metaphorically and by extension abuses Donnie, abuses Stanley, right?
Right.
Is responsible for the objectification
Absolutely.
of an entire generation. What is it? He says 35 years that show's been running.
Yeah.
The objectification of an entire generation of young people. And the commodification, right? Not just the objectification,
Yes,
but the
but
putting to
commodification.
commercial
Yeah,
utility,
absolutely.
which is so vile.
Yeah.
as
And
he's
behind this
appearing
veneer of just like,
avuncular and
Yeah.
yeah. Just the villain of the piece.
I think so.
Yeah. Do you feel pity for him? Do you feel empathy for him as he is unraveling? So that moment when he actually loses it as the cameras are rolling at the end of the musical round that they're doing, which is such a terrible, that quiz show is so awful.
The quiz show's awful.
It's
Yeah.
so hilarious.
Yeah.
How intentionally like chaotic and just how ill-conceived
anarchic.
every aspect of that show is. But as he's unraveling there in front of the camera, and this is a testament to the performance perhaps more even than the intention behind the character, but I really find my heart going out to him in that
Yes.
moment.
Well, that's before we know.
Yeah, sure.
And yes. I think that's lovely. No, as we follow him, I think we do have a certain kind of empathy for him and a certain kind of, again, we see his aloneness. He's also alone.
Yeah.
Even though his wife seems so lovely. By the time we get to the end and by the time she says, you deserve to die alone, I am with her 100%.
Yes. I'm maybe not as completely enamored with that specific performance as I am with almost everyone else in this very, very large
The mother?
cast. Yeah.
I think
doesn't
she's very good.
totally work for me. That's Melinda Dillon, who is, of course, known for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but is weirdly, to me at least, best known for being the mom in Harry and the Hendersons.
That might be just to you, but
that
okay.
film?
Yeah, I mean, vaguely.
Again, another weird VHS that I watched 1,000 times as a
Something
child.
about Big Macs, maybe? I'm not sure.
There's something about that performance that, it doesn't completely land for me. It's just maybe a little more televisual.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I thought some of the problems were with the writing. Again, this is a pet peeve of mine, and I understand why we have to do it in films because we just have so much to cover, especially in these long-standing relationships. But I dislike when couples have a fight for the first time that a couple would never have for the first time. Like never.
Yes.
Yes.
Because even if they've never actually had this fight, they have a
They've
shorthand
talked
for
around
negotiating
it.
this.
Yes,
Yeah, absolutely right.
Yes. So that's
a
the only part
really,
that kind of falls a little flat.
Really strong observation. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. Shall we move on from Jimmy, but maybe stick with the show? Shall we move to William H. Macy?
Sure. Yeah.
I guess while we're sticking with the show, we should talk a little about Clark Gregg, who is great, I guess, in 2 lines. Not enough to make an impression on me that was Clark Gregg, which is outstanding.
That's wild, yeah.
Felicity Huffman is so good in this film. I know that I love Felicity Huffman anyway, but she does the thing that she does better than anyone, which is seem so soft and sweet and good, and then immediately reveal that she is hard as nails.
Yep.
It's such a great turn. It's exactly why you cast her.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah.
Yeah. She's lovely.
Let's pivot then
terrible.
to her husband, of course, William H. Macy, Donnie, who wins the game show when he's a kid, but we meet him as he is being fired from his job by the brilliant Alfred Molina. What do you think? What do you think of this guy?
So he's an interesting character. I think William H. Macy is gorgeous in this film. I think he's so lovely.
It's
one
one of the best performances.
So quickly that he's in love with Brad the braces guy. And then you get that that's why he's getting braces before he ever tells you.
Yeah.
It's really phenomenal work. He's really excellent. The character's a little bit silly, but I guess that's okay. And I do like this through line. What's the poem that's like, they fuck you up, your mom and dad. They don't mean to, but they do. They give you all the faults they had, plus some extra just for you. Is that
some
it?
Extra just for you. That's the Larkin.
Something like
yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
So good. Anyway, it's that.
It is, right? This is part of the thematic landscape of the film. Is this like generational violence,
trauma and
right?
violence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
His is particularly sad, perhaps because we get to really, to start at such a point of such desperation and inadequacy, right? The scene in which he is fired is like so sad and wretched. And then to watch him spiral from there is just, it's awful. But he really does have this, I don't know, wide-eyed quality.
Yes,
It's
those giant glasses that they give him.
there's something like indefatigable, right?
Yeah.
You get the sense that that's exactly what he looked like when he was a little kid, right? Even like
Yes.
the retro haircut. It's like he hasn't moved on from
He's
this
just
moment, which
arrested
is
in it.
one of the ways in
Yeah.
which your parents can exert violence upon you is to keep you repressed, either, you know, intentionally
Yes.
or unintentionally. It's so sad, and he handles himself so beautifully. Him striving for dignity as he's being undercut by the asshole at the bar
Yeah.
is just
Who's also giving a lovely performance.
also
That
such a
guy
lovely
is
performance.
So cool.
Just
Yeah.
wall to wall knockout
Yeah.
performances. I love also, like, forgive me for saying that, I love also that Brad is not that hot.
Yeah.
You see him from the distance and
He's
you're
like
like,
a bartender hot,
hey,
sure.
that's a lot of man right there. And then you get close and you're like, no, you are like a 7. You know, like, but it's so good and human. And of course, yeah, we get this incidental detail here. Not only was he a contestant on the game show, not only was he a winner on the game show, not only did he have his money taken away by his parents, we're mirroring Stanley here very obviously, but also he was struck by lightning.
Yeah.
And is apparently just as famous for being struck by lightning as he was for appearing on this show.
Yeah.
The world of this film is just wild.
Rich.
Yeah, I think he's so great. And then the returning to Alfred Molina's business, whatever that business is, the stealing of the money.
Yes. Yeah.
And
That
then-
one, I almost missed that thread. There were just so many things happening by that point. This is well into the third hour of the film. And there's, again, so much connective tissue that it took me a second. He had already left because I remember him opening the safe and reaching into it. But I saw the garbage bag. And for some reason, my brain was like, I thought that he was digging something out of the garbage can.
Oh, I see.
So
Sure.
it wasn't until we returned back that I realized what had happened. And I was like, I hope I don't have to like look that up later. But luckily we got back to it. I was like, okay, I was able to figure out what happened. But that was one of those moments where I started to kind of like lose the thread. I don't know if that's because that particular part of the film took a little bit too long. I don't know if you can speak to that. I remember him setting out the keys in a row.
Yeah, no, it takes a little bit long, and also we're just dealing with so many big emotional
Right?
swings.
There's so
at
many
that
things
point
happening right then.
That the quietness of his emotional swing is, I think, yeah, it's easy to miss.
Yeah.
As you're, you know, juggling 5 flaming bowling balls.
Right. And
This is-
taking notes.
Yeah, exactly. This is a tricky one to get by. But I love the desire to steal the money. I love the decision to steal the money, right? Reclaiming something that is his from a paternal figure, right?
Yeah,
There's some
sure,
really nice
sure.
thematic work happening there. But I really love his change of heart. Just his little
Yeah.
momentary, what am I doing? Like, it's so
Right.
sweet. The way that we deal with that particular, you know, I guess 2 intersections and length of street in the third
Yes.
act of the film, as we see these characters physically occupy the same space fleetingly. It's so good, so sophisticated, so brave to attempt something like that. And then, of course, we end in a peculiar place with Donnie, because in the pursuit of justice, in the pursuit of returning the money, he falls and busts open his teeth and now needs orthodontic surgery. Is that a cruel little twist? Is that like irony? Is that like a you know, monkey's paw genie wish kind of deal? Is that in fact a be careful what you wish for situation right here at the end of the film? How do you interpret that kind of thematically?
A little bit, yes. But also I just think it's nice to have him left with a mark that he made himself and not somebody else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if that.
That's a really interesting point, because of course, yeah, he will have the orthodontic surgery that he needs. Presumably he'll get the money for that from somewhere, but he'll have that orthodontic surgery, and that will necessarily literally change his face. He's literally not going to look like the 10-year-old kid that he was on the game show anymore.
I guess
That's a really interesting insight. Yeah. I don't love it as an ironic reflection of Brad or his desire for braces or whatever we were doing back at the beginning of the film. But yeah, that moment is really strong. I think William H. Macy is fantastic.
Yeah,
generally,
he's great.
Period. But also in this film.
I've heard a lovely man too. I don't remember what it was that he shot here in Oklahoma before we were even doing films in Oklahoma, but there was something, and everyone who met with him or worked with him or just had him come into a convenience store was like, what a lovely man.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Let's kind of sidestep then and move forward a generation. Let's talk about Stanley Spector. Let's talk about Lewis Blackman. Let's talk about
What an
this
incredible performance.
kid.
Who was this kid?
He's not an actor. He
was
did,
so
I think,
good.
3 films. He did one a couple years after and then another a decade after. He's done a tiny little bit of TV work. I believe that he is a music producer now, but he
Wow.
is phenomenal in this role. Such
We're
a great
always a little bit
performance.
hard on child actors.
Yeah.
But we loved, of course, Jonathan Lipnicki.
Lipnicki,
I'll never
yep.
get it right. Anyway, we loved him. And this kid also, I just thought was so good
Yeah.
and really tugged at my heart. Had such a lovely maturity and a sadness. Again, a character who is isolated. I really had trouble watching the segment because it took so long from when he said that he had to go to the bathroom to when he actually pissed. And I was like, I found it very challenging to pay attention to the movie because my heart was going out to this kid.
Yeah.
It was really hard to
And
like stay with it. And we kept cutting back to other stories.
That's exactly it.
And I
Because
was
of the way
like,
we're
let the kid
intercutting,
go
it's
to
like
the
a
bathroom.
half
Oh my God. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah.
Like
it
it's
was
clearly
terrible.
no more than maybe it's commercial
Within,
TV, so it's like
yeah.
maybe 10 minutes.
Maybe 8
but
to
still,
10 minutes.
yeah.
Yeah. But awful.
It's really, really challenging. No, I think he does a fantastic job. He really manages to communicate both his intelligence as a character, but also his emotional understanding, his
Yes.
emotional connection. Nothing that is happening here is unknown to him. Nothing that is happening here is surprising to him. He's just kind of accepting it, which is the saddest thing that you can do with a
So
kid that is
sad.
being manipulated and exploited by
But then
his dad, who is the goddamn worst.
his dad is the goddamn worst. His
Danny
dad is
Pickett
the
from
worst.
Lost. Did you recognize him?
Didn't recognize him.
Danny Pickett
No.
from Lost, the guy whose his girlfriend gets shot and killed.
Sure.
He's one of the others, and then
Yeah.
he beats the hell out of Sawyer.
Yeah.
That's that guy.
Sure.
Yeah. So
Real asshole vibes.
just a real recurring asshole.
No, the fact that the kid sticks up for himself and doesn't stand up, and I know it's because he's so ashamed, but it's also that he has made a decision. He's over. He's not going to get up. He's just not going to.
Well, and that even forcing him to get up is exploitation. He's being
Yes.
exploited by his father,
Yes.
by the show, by these other kids who are
Yeah.
more interested in setting this record, or what, who have agents, who are not living the same
Right.
kind of life as him.
Right.
He's a victim of all of their choices. And another moment where a character displays a more sophisticated internal life, a
Yeah.
more sophisticated piece of characterization than we would necessarily expect from any kind of movie, let alone a film that's juggling this many things
Yeah.
all at once. Yeah, that stand I thought was beautifully written, beautifully observed, absolutely defined, and yet still completely believable
Mhm.
for a kid of that age.
Yep.
Just masterful.
Yeah.
I want to talk just a little bit more about that incredible tracking shot, because that kid handles it in a way that I think I've never seen. Coming
Tell me
in
all about it.
all the way from the parking lot, right? We start in the parking lot in the pissing rain. We
Mhm.
come into the TV studio. It's a 2-minute and 15-second tracking shot
Wow.
where he starts off with his dad, gets
Mhm.
passed off to Felicity Huffman. They come around this whole block of artificially constructed set. We do the beat in the elevator. Felicity Huffman is in her full, Dolores Umbridge before everything goes bad
Yep,
kind of
yep.
mode here.
Mhm.
And it works just so beautifully. It carries us all the way to Jimmy's office. I think it's an unimpeachable bit of cinematography, and it works primarily because this kid is not only hitting his marks and doing such a brilliant job physically, but is completely delivering the emotional reality of this child
Yeah.
at every step, literally with every step. He's just doing a great job.
Mm.
I think it's, masterful.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful work.
For all that, we've basically just done the entirety of Stanley's story, right? That's
Basically,
almost
yeah.
all of it. He finally leaves the set, and we pick up right at the end with him telling his dad that he has to treat him better.
Yeah. Which
And
is like
his-
in the middle of the night, right?
Yes, yeah.
Ah.
It's heartbreaking, and it's
Yes.
so simple, and it's so true, and he's asking for so little, and his dad cannot even lift himself out of his own self-pity to meet him, to offer any kind of crumb of comfort or solace in that moment. It's I guess, this is the open question. Are we seeing resolution to these cycles of generational abuse, or are we seeing, in effect, the continuation of the cycle? Do you think
I don't
that
think
Stanley...
we're seeing a continuation. I think neither.
Okay.
I think we're seeing something that's much more true and much more human, which is just the people who are affected having to heal
Interesting.
on their own.
Yeah. Which is...
Like sometimes there is forgiveness given, but sometimes there's not.
Yeah.
And regardless, it's up to the individual to grow and to move forward and to leave that past behind them. What's the quote they keep on giving from the book that's like,
Well, the quote from the book, this is not actually from a book. The quote is, as the book says, we might be through with the past, but the past ain't through with us. That's the
So
recurring beat.
this is Mackey's book. This is his gross book.
It's unclear what the book is. I mean,
Oh, interesting.
when people say the book, we're usually referring to the Bible, but that is not the
clearly
biblical.
not this it. Yeah.
No, because the biblical reference that we get throughout this movie is Exodus 8:2. Did you see all the references to? There's literally, when we get a shot of the audience in the TV studio, right? There's a guy on the left-hand side of the frame who is holding up a giant piece of paper upon which is written Exodus 8:2.
Wow.
That
I never
is
saw
Paul
that.
Thomas Anderson. That is the actual director holding that as like a message to the audience. 8s and 2s appear all over the place. In the very prologue, right, when the guy is getting dealt his poker hand and he says, all I need is a 2, and instead
he deals
he's
an
dealt an 8,
an
right?
8. Yeah, excuse me.
The booking number for the black woman, when we get the flash of her, the black woman from the very beginning of the movie,
Right.
when we get the flash of her like mugshot,
Right.
that number is like all 8s and 2s. It's 8s and 2s in the phone number for Tom Cruise's terrible predatory seduction thing that he's doing. So 8s and 2s are all over the movie. And of course, Exodus 8:2 is about the plague of frogs, right? It's Moses being told about the plague of frogs that will come, foreshadowing the events at the end of the film. So we don't know what the book is that we're referencing, but obviously that idea that we're done with the past, but the past ain't done with us, right? The idea that we must break these cycles of trauma, cycles of violence, heal this damage that has been done and restore a sense of justice. That is what the film is about, and perhaps the most powerful way. Yeah.
That's so interesting because I did not think of the frogs as a plague, like at all.
Well, and we may not be supposed to think of the frogs as a plague, right? It may be that this is just a coincidence, but what does a coincidence, I suppose in the broader sense, what does a coincidence mean in the frame of this film where we're constantly being reminded of the artifice? What does a plague mean in the context of this film where we're being reminded of the artifice?
Yeah. I mean, a plague usually, or at least in Exodus, these plagues were like punishments by God to force someone to turn around and do what they already knew they had to do.
Yeah.
But when the frogs fall, which of course I knew was going to happen, like that's the thing that everybody says about this movie. Oh, there's the Amy Mann song, and oh, it rains frogs.
There are 4,900 rubber frogs were manufactured for this film, yes.
So I knew it was coming, but when that first one hits the windshield, I jumped a mile.
And it's so much bigger and fleshier and more real.
Yes.
Than when you hear Rain of Frogs, right?
The soundscape of it was extraordinary.
It's awful.
I don't
it's
know.
Wonderful in its
wonderful
awfulness,
and awful. Wonderful and awful. Yes. And the visceral, like, I didn't think about the blood on the windshields. You know, I didn't think about those things. And it's so horrific and so startling. I think of the woman, would you say her name was Melanie Dillon or something? The mom who was crying in the car and just screaming as this was happening, which was such a real response to like how horrifying this thing is that's happening. And I think about the stillness that Stanley has when he says, this happens. Mm-hmm. This is a thing that happens. And how much that just like calmed my whole like nervous system.
Yeah.
But it made me think about like, I mean, some of the trauma that we've been through. It made me think about COVID. It made me think about the tornado last year. It made me think about these moments where it's just like, okay, this happens. This is the thing that happens. But saying that does kind of make you feel better. Like it does kind of like, here is a thing that is completely outside of my control, that is horrifying. Here I'm surrounded by danger and violence and death, and I'm going to get through it. Like, and there's an inevitability of it, of its coming and of its passing, and of like the waiting. I don't know, that I found very moving, and I got really choked up and just felt, I don't know, something I've never felt before, I don't think, watching a movie. It was just such a strange, emotional experience of, yes, damage and inflicted violence and waiting it out and being safe through it, except for the one guy who, well, he was killing himself anyway, and maybe that was for the best. I really hated him by that point, and it was okay that it was his time to go. Yeah,
the normalization of that kind of absolutely excessive, right, like apocalyptic thing. There's a kind of, I don't know, eschatological bent to this film, right? The descent into apocalyptic language, even as much as like apocalyptic tone, right? That spiraling down, the worsening, the compounding of all of the damage that we've done generation by generation, I think is a very real aspect. And you're right. I think that that's a really important way of reading that resolution. I'm also reading it simultaneously as a further affirmation of that enforced frame of that alienation device, right? This is a thing that happens, he says, stock still in the middle of the frame, as we're not even seeing the frogs. We're seeing this like projected shadow play on the wall behind him that slows down, that looks fake as hell to start with, like deliberately
I didn't
so.
actually love that, but
and
yes.
it slows down. Well, I'm reading it as, this is a thing that happens. Look at me demonstrating how this is not happening, right? We're being reminded of its artificiality, but also its narrative truth and power. And yeah, the way that this film constantly lives in that liminal space between, while applying significant pressure both above and below, right? While pushing back against the textual cinematic frame and pushing against the narrative component too. I find that so fascinating, so interesting. It's so rich. I think we could spend another hour just talking about the various ways in which that is evoked and subverted through the course of the entire thing. Stanley, tragic, but something of a triumph, I think, at the heart of this film. And God damn that performance. When he is so pink in his cheeks and so like flushed and his eyes are so bright with shame and anger, and the way that he is occasionally having to reach for the word that he wants to express himself. There's such adult sophistication in that performance. And I'm glad that he's a music producer. I hope he's happy. I hope he's having a great life. But I think we lost somebody. I think we lost a real
Although God knows there's nothing
industry.
worse than being a child star.
Right?
So maybe he actually got the best of it. Yeah.
So we've kind of dealt with the show and that side of things. I guess we kind of have to swing over and talk about, well, let's maybe start with Julianne Moore. I think that might be the natural place to go if we're going to explore Philip Seymour Hoffman and Earl and that side of the story. And then maybe we'll finish with Frank. How does that sound? Sounds like we've got a lot of movie left to discuss. I know, but we've framed it out so much. I think let's talk about Julianne Moore. Let's get right into it. I think that first scene that we get with the doctor is so immediate, so powerful. How does she work for you in the film as a performance? How does Linda work for you as a performance?
So I like the way that Linda is written quite a lot. I don't love Julianne Moore's performance of her all the time.
Yeah.
I wish that I did.
I'm finding this very hard because we've had 2 movies this year between this and May December.
Yeah.
We've had 2 movies where I went in very excited because Julianne Moore was in this film.
Yeah.
And I came out not disappointed exactly, but definitely underwhelmed by the performance. And I'm starting to wonder if I maybe just don't like Julianne Moore, or maybe she's just not as good as... Because I'm also having trouble thinking of like moments where she has really knocked my socks off.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it's hard to say. She's at her loveliest, I think, in this film.
She is radiantly beautiful.
Really, really beautiful and just like arresting.
Yeah.
But overall, I find her like emotional performance just a bit keening, like a little over the top, maybe, and a little. I don't know. I guess maybe you can't put her next to Philip Seymour Hoffman. That was rude. Don't do that. You know?
Well,
put her next to Cruise more.
Partly she suffers a little bit because Linda's scenes are, even compared to everyone else's, so isolated.
Yeah.
We're just getting these big emotional swings from her, and we're getting very little cause and effect linking these scenes together, right? She goes to the doctor, she goes to the pharmacy, she loses her temper, she goes to the lawyer, she loses her temper, right?
Yeah.
We're kind of just in a place here that's complex, yes, but the way that we're manifesting that complexity is the same kind of beat at the end of each of these scenes. And then, of course, returning home and having basically the same beat with Philip Seymour Hoffman and slapping him and being so outraged about Frank in a way that isn't ever really resolved, right? We don't have space to resolve every tiny thread of connection between these characters. But it's unfortunate. And I didn't really ever completely buy her desire to kill herself, right? As awful as that is. We get that scene when she returns home, when she's sitting in the car in the garage, and then she winds the window down and we see the smoke, the exhaust fume billowing in, and that's so harrowing and awful anyway.
Yes.
And then actually trying to take her life in the car later. Kind of emotionally a little hollow, I guess.
A little inert. Yeah. I'm not really sure why. It's hard to put my finger on it, but I do like the idea that in the final hours she is overcome with guilt.
Yeah.
And with something like love, although I think she thinks it's more love than it is guilt, and I don't think that's true.
Interesting.
And just an inability to be in the room with his pain. Just a complete inability to do it.
That is certainly true and very powerful. That I completely buy emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bothered by the effect of the rain of frogs also feeling like it's a specifically targeted punishment at her because of the way that the ambulance goes out of control and rolls on its side.
Incredible shot, by the way.
A fantastic
my
shot.
God.
Absolutely. And so awful, intense, and brilliant and
just
fragile
in
to watch.
seconds.
Yeah. But it does feel a little bit like she is being punished in a way that other characters who have demonstrably done worse things are not so much being punished, right?
Sure. Interesting.
Although I guess we could go back to like first principles and really talk about the moral schema of the film and how, the guilty are punished at the end and how those punishments manifest themselves. Yes, Rick doesn't really get punished, but he also doesn't get his money. And in the end, isn't that the worst punishment?
He doesn't get his money. That's true. Yeah, the frogs don't affect him at all. He sleeps right through it, doesn't he? That's a shame.
Well, again, but I can only speculate intentional. I think
that's true.
Yeah.
But because he doesn't feel guilty.
That's interesting. Yeah, obviously the manifestation of guilt is very purposeful too. Huh. Or at least, even if not guilt, then at least a kind of awareness of one's own flaws, right? Because I don't know that Claudia feels guilty. I don't know that Jim feels guilty. But they are certainly...
That's true.
They are mindful. Yeah. They are, at least, right? We're done with the past, but the past isn't done with us. They are conscious of the fact that the past is not done with them. In a way that Rick... maybe it's just because the character is too much of a sketch. We don't get enough. We get those awful scenes of him in the green room where he's just an asshole.
Just an asshole.
But that's the problem, right? He is just an asshole. It's kind of a first pass sketch of a character.
Oh, it was so great. There are 2 times when he says, "I love you," though. And they're so dagger to the heart.
Yeah.
They're so performative, but like part of keeping this kid in line. Oh, it's awful.
Exactly. Right. Yes. I'm giving you exactly the thing that I know you want. And I know that you don't believe me, but you still want it.
Yeah. Oh.
So terrible.
Yeah.
Let's segue from there then to Phil. Let's talk about
Philip
the
Seymour
absolutely
Hoffman.
brilliant Philip Seymour Hoffman.
So good.
I mean, I find it hard to watch him on screen now just because of the circumstances of his death and what was left undone. He is, as I said, I think maybe never better than in this film. It is such a, in some sense, minor role, right? He carries the focus, but there's always that sense that I shouldn't be the one carrying the focus. And I love that so much. And all of the little character choices that he makes, all of the little interactions that he gets, he does phone acting in this movie better than anyone has ever done phone acting ever. I think it's spectacular. The moment when he's ordering the porn
magazines,
which and then
so funny, and then we understand why.
Yes, it's so good,
so good.
But his indignance on the phone when the I don't know, whoever's handling the delivery says, "Do you still want us to deliver the cigarettes and the peanut butter?" Yes, yes.
It's very good.
More done in that moment than most actors will do in their entire careers.
So
and
good.
He's just brilliant.
Fantastic.
Though, might we argue somewhat incidental, right? He's kind of a facilitator to the rest of the plot.
Mm-hmm.
But literally his big emotional turn is standing in the back of the shot while Tom Cruise cries over the body of his dad. Does that, does he deserve more? Should he be more central to the story?
I don't know. We give him a lot. We give him... He's the only one who shows grief in the form of affection.
Yeah.
For this man who, by all accounts, is a bad dude, like a bad guy.
Yeah.
But he, I guess, gets to be, because he is personally unharmed by this man, gets to express something that's just compassion.
Certainly, though... I don't think it's just because he's unharmed. I think that we see within him a greater empathy and a greater... he is almost the fully realized version of Jim, right? If Jim gets his shit together and deals with his past trauma, then he could someday be Phil, right? He could someday rise to that level of kindness and of goodness. And because it's not just simple. It's not just the way that he's working with Earl. It's not just he's fallen under the sway of this tyrannical old bastard who's now dying. Because the way that he deals with Linda is just as sophisticated. The way that he deals with Frank is just as sophisticated. He's just the heart of this picture. And I think a very easy performance to phone in, a very easy performance to underdevelop. And I think quite the contrary. I think he's just phenomenal.
Agreed.
And with that, let's talk about the reason for the season. Let's talk about Cruz, shall we? Let's talk about Frank.
Yeah. Frank is a terrible character. It's really too bad. It's the worst part of the movie, and that's really a shame. It's just too much. We talked about the movie being operatic and being heightened, and of course it is. But there's a strangeness and an off-puttingness to the character, not to the performance. The performance is also over the top, but it's not exceeding the material. Like, the material is brash.
But it is the only performance in the film that is consciously and consistently a performance within the film, right? That he is never being authentic right up until the end.
Right up until
and
the end.
And even then he's kind of fighting his
moment.
own performativity. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite moment for the character, I guess?
I'm silently judging you is my favorite moment. It's so terrible. Like it's
why is that not like such a meme? I don't know why.
Yeah, I will make a meme of that and I'll post it over on the Discord. Patreon.com/nextword if you would like access to the I do that quite often actually. I will
drop
clip a couple of GIFs and
great.
drop them over in the Discord. But that one definitely will make its way over to the Discord. Yes. I'm silently judging you.
Yeah.
It's because it's so nothing, right? It's so much not a response because he has no response to give. So instead he's pretending that the lack of a response, he's pretending that his hollowness is a choice.
Yeah.
And it's disgusting.
Yeah,
it's so gross.
Interesting.
But yeah, what was your favorite moment?
When he wakes up off the couch after his dad has died and his face is still tear-streaked.
Yeah.
But for a moment, he's just someone who lost their dad. For a moment, he was just asleep. I don't know. There's something really, really beautiful.
And he looks so young in that moment. So young. Too, right?
And then having to deal with the phone and Linda, like this other catastrophe just put into his lap. First his mother and then his father and now his stepmom person.
Yeah.
You just feel something.
The way that he processes, we do it very quickly, right? Because we've got so much of an emotional arc to get through by the time he's at his dying father's bedside. Right. But the way that we first process his feelings about his mother, so true and so strong. And of course, Cruz has talked publicly long after the fact, although Paul Thomas Anderson was not so discreet and was definitely talking about it at the time that Magnolia was coming out, that this is also Cruz again kind of processing his own feelings about his father's death. And his relationship was not so very different as the relationship that's depicted here. So obviously it is a very personal thing, but I think it's magnificent. I wish that Frank was not so horribly overwritten in the first instance. I just find it so off-putting.
Yeah.
And in a way that I'm not, thrilled by the magnificence of this bastard. I just don't want to see this fucking guy. I just don't want to deal with this douche.
Yes.
Right at the beginning of the film. But we do get something like an arc. And we do get something too about how he is constrained by the past in a completely different way, right? He is constrained by the negative space of the past. He has broken ties so completely, fabricated and mythologized his own history so completely that he is limited by that and locked inside this very small box, this tiny little, cell of his own crafting, which I find really rich and interesting, juxtaposed with the way that the other characters are defined so much by their past trauma too. Do you think, and speculative, of course, do you think that he comes out of this a better person? Do you think that he stops selling Seduce and Destroy? Do you think that he stops
I don't know.
thinking about women like this?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you hope so, of course. And at least a little, I think he at least has to become more honest with himself. And you hope that gives him something like real connectivity, because he's, like, of all of the people in the film, he might be the most isolated.
I want two things for Frank as a human being after this film is over. I want him, obviously, first and most importantly, to apologize to Guinevere. I think that his treatment of her is so abhorrent. But then much more importantly, or as importantly, both things can't be much more importantly. That's wild. I guess as importantly, I want him to contact the neighbor that told her the real story in the first place.
Yes.
To go back to this actual evidence of his childhood, evidence of who he really was, and reconnect with that. I think that would be lovely. We are running rather long, no surprise for a 3-hour movie, but we've got so much still to discuss. We need to pivot, I think, and talk a little about, the metaphysical framework of this film. We need to talk a little about what this film means and what it says, for all of its desire to appear studied and constructed, and yet to constantly reassure us of its own internal authenticity and to refer out to the real world and point to other inconceivable examples of coincidence out there in our real lives. What does this film say about, well, I guess, God, grace? Where do we start with that kind of, is there a metaphysical aspect to this film?
Yes,
Okay.
I think so. I think it's in the title, and I think it's in the beautiful imagery that we get for the poster, which I'm so thrilled to hear that PTA designed. But just like all of these petals of people connected here at the heart, the core to something, which is also something even bigger, which is, this living tree, which is also roots in the ground, which is also the earth, which is also the universe. Like, there's so much there already, just about how much connects us as humans, whether we see it or wish it or not.
The other thematic aspect to the Magnolia, it also inspired, that interpretation I think is completely valid and very rich, yes. It also inspired parts of the color palette of the film. He was inspired by the actual, color palette that you get from a magnolia tree in real life. And then the other aspect is that it is a folk remedy for cancer, that you chew the bark of the magnolia as a way of warding off and curing cancer. Yeah,
that's interesting, because that was the other thing that I meant to say and forgot to about the raining of frogs, is how much it reminded me of cancer, and I wonder why that is. I think it's twofold. It's again just like the visceral, violent attack of it, and then something very specific to me, which is that the very first time I did a dissection in class in high school was a frog, and mine was riddled with cancer. And when we opened it up, it was like, what? Why does mine look different from everybody else's?
Wow.
And it's just something I've always remembered, and it's always been a little bit horrifying to me.
Sure.
Just to see just this black speckled and cancerous mass just everywhere and taking over this frog's whole body. So I think some of it was that too, because Frank's mom died of cancer, and now his dad is. And then Philip Seymour Hoffman's on the phone with the guy who said that my mom had the same kind. And you just, the relentlessness of it. And I always think of this Sandra Cisneros quote about, I think diseases have no eyes and they pick with a lazy finger anyone, just anyone.
Yeah. And of course, this film would acknowledge the fact that you had a cancer-ridden frog in high school and are now seeing significance and symbolism is that as proof and demonstration that its thesis is correct, that coincidence and interconnectivity are in some way fundamental. Yeah. I think that's, I think it's so interesting. I don't myself, I think, buy a direct intercessory narrative here. Like, I don't think that God causes a rain of frogs at the end of this film. Because if it hadn't been a rain of frogs, it would have been something else.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's where we're leading, perhaps, right? That it's about the significance that we find. There's not actually any significance in Jim helping Donnie at the end, right? Except for the significance that we find in it, except for the significance that emerges from it, perhaps. And partly that too, of course, is narrative, right? Partly that is a product of the cinematic frame. So
and even why narratives work for us so much is that we're just such pattern seekers by nature.
Yeah.
Part of our evolution and part of what helps us survive.
And I think that's one of the things that we can see at the end of the film is the way that the stories that have happened to these characters are being internalized as stories. And now they are being changed by them in much the same way as we are changed by the experience of watching a film or reading a book that has like a profound emotional effect on us, right? Like Donnie is internalizing what has happened to him as we leave him in the film, and he will be changed by the story in the way that we are changed by Donnie's story too. It's wild. It's extraordinary, and we're going to have to put it on the list of Tom Cruise films.
It really, I think it's like a category all its own. That's so strange.
It kind of has to be, right? Because for all of this, I think we've been incredibly complimentary about this film. I'm a huge fan of this film, and I really am now eager to plunge into PTA's filmography. For all that, I'm going to hesitate every time I recommend this movie.
Yeah.
Hey, dear listener, if you haven't seen it, well, I mean, we've spoiled a lot of it, but also a lot of it is in the performance. I think that even if you've listened to this whole podcast, if it sounds like something you would like to watch, then you should go watch it. But also, if you get 20 minutes in and decide this is not for you, I can't blame you. It's sprawling and it's incredibly ambitious. It's incredibly literary. It's incredibly poetic. It's almost not a movie, right? This takes us back to the first conversations you and I ever had about like the boundaries of genre and like what counts and what doesn't. This isn't a movie. This is a film.
Right. Yeah.
And I do think that that's That's a meaningful distinction.
Yeah. No, I guess for that reason, it makes me immediately think of putting it somewhere around Legend, because Legend had that same kind of feeling to me, that like immersive experience that maybe doesn't always hold together plot-wise.
Well, Legend is currently number 8 on the list. Interview with the Vampire is number 7. Rain Man is number 6. The Firm is number 5. And I think maybe with The Firm, you're getting to something that is just much, much, much more conventional, of course.
Different,
but also something
apples
that is
and
just
oranges.
Yeah, to a certain extent, that is inevitably going to be true where we put it. And I think it would be completely okay for this to be your personal number 2, but overall it's actually number 7. I think is that's
so
a defensible position. I think I'm looking just ever so slightly higher than you. I can't imagine, Rain Man is not by any measure, by any metric, trying to undertake the same kind of narrative purpose of this film is, but they do perhaps feel like the closest in terms of, the ways in which connectivity and relationships fuel us. It is the most human story perhaps that we've had from Cruise so far.
Sure.
And I think I like Magnolia better.
I like Magnolia better than Rain Man for sure.
So I could be tempted to put it at number 6 on the list, right underneath The Firm. How does that sound to you? Again, with an asterisk, I think this is really special.
I think it's really special. It's certainly much more special than The Firm. But also, if somebody was like, hey, I get to watch one of these 2 movies, I might recommend The Firm first just because it's so much...
You'd have to ask the
There's
person
no
a
entry
lot
to
about
barrier,
themselves.
Or barrier to entry, rather. Yeah. What's above The Firm?
A Few Good Men.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So
you're
you're feeling that A Few Good Men is your absolute ceiling. Like there's no way that you could, in good conscience, with foresight and clear spirits, put Magnolia on this list above A Few Good Men.
I could see a world where it was there. I really could, but I don't think so. Probably. Yeah. I think right under A Few Good Men and right above The Firm. Does that sound right to you?
I think that's defensible.
You think that's good?
I do. I think A Few Good Men has profound things to say.
It does.
Similarly to Magnolia, in a way that maybe The Firm doesn't quite.
Yeah, it's much more succinct.
I do think that above A Few Good Men, we've got Mission Impossible, then Top Gun, then Jerry Maguire.
Yeah,
and those films are
things.
basically
They're
perfect, is the thing. Those films are basically like rock solid.
Yeah.
And I think that Magnolia is not. I think there are a couple of moments in the production that are less refined. They're a little less elegant. I think it puts, for one thing, the music is too loud through this entire film. And I know that makes me sound like the oldest man in the world, but it's just mixed too high. And it's mixed consistently at the same level, which means that when Jim goes to Claudia's apartment and bangs on the door telling her to turn it down, we only know that it is loud because the other dialogue is much quieter in contrast. Yeah. It's weird that it's been compressed in that way so that everything loud is the same loud.
Yeah.
And that's a strange choice. I don't know about that. But
fair point.
Yeah. I'm happy putting it there, but as I say, with an asterisk, if this is your favorite Tom Cruise movie, then I think that is a thing to be applauded, honestly.
I think this is a good spot. I like that. That feels good and true to me.
All right. The new number 5 on the list, Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia. This has been an absolute pleasure, an absolute blast. Everything that we do here at The Last Star in Hollywood, everything we do here at Next Word is possible thanks to you guys. We are all one and the same. We are all interconnected, and occasionally you help us shelter from a rain of frogs and then maybe take us to the orthodontist. It's very kind of you. Elizabeth, would you like to read the list of our superstar patrons who make all this possible?
Our deepest thanks to Leslie Skipa, Louise in Dallas, Megan Lauder, Phoebe, Art Kilmer, Kimberly Bear, Self on a Shelf, and since my time in LA, welcome Jolene Stark.
Welcome, Jolene, and thank you so much to all of you for your support. Stay tuned over on the Patreon if you are a Patreon supporter. If you're not a Patreon supporter, patreon.com/nextword to become a Patreon supporter. We just posted over there our discussion of The American President, the 1995 Rob Reiner, Aaron Sorkin film. That was a really fun, just excuse to delve into the world of Sorkin and the lunatic mind of Aaron Sorkin. That was a really great discussion. So that's over on the Patreon, along with, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. You want some dirty dancing? We got some dirty dancing. Gone in 60 seconds? No one?
Weird one.
No one wants Gone in 60 seconds? Well, it's there anyway. I mean,
become a patron and you can vote.
Exactly. Yes, you can go and add your vote to the large pile of votes for Bridget Jones's Diary, which is going to be our next bonus episode. I'm so excited to talk about that. We just watched it, and I'm so excited to watch it again. It's such a stupid, brilliant film. It's going to be a blast. So all of this is possible thanks to your support. Thank you all so much. We're going to be back next week. Well, it can't stay good forever, right? Next week, we move into the 21st century for everyone but the most pedantic sort. We move into the year 2000, and we get to study a film which is, I think, most generously kind of a waste of everyone involved.
Ooh.
Kind of a waste of all the actors, all the crew, and particularly the director. Next week, John Woo's Mission Impossible 2. The bad Mission Impossible one. But we'll try and make the discussion fun, and we hope that you will join us for it. Until then, thank you so much for listening.
We'll see you next time.